What does horror reveal when the monsters aren't hiding under the bed, but living next door or within ourselves? On this episode, I'm joined by Briana N. Cox and Kailee Pedersen, two groundbreaking debut authors changing the face of literary horror. Briana Cox brings visceral, slow-burn existential dread to her novel Indigent, set amid addiction, gentrification, and economic violence within the margins of Atlanta. Kailee Pedersen's Sacrificial Animals melds rural family trauma, Asian myth, and operatic atmosphere on a Nebraska farm, exploring queer identity and haunting loss. Both authors elevate the genre with psychological depth, brutal honesty, and an unflinching look at home, hunger, and the power of myth. This is the Dark Mind Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider supporting it by subscribing to my Patreon for exclusive daily blog posts and weekly book and film reviews. Head over to patreon.com/The Dark Mind Podcast and become a citizen of the darkness. You can also support the show for free by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the dark conversation alive. So without further ado, I give you Briana N. Cox and Kailee Pedersen. Briana, Kailee, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having us, Vince. We're really excited to be here tonight.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 29th day of October 2025. I was very fortunate to get an advance copy of Briana's debut novel, Indigent, as well as getting to read Kailee's debut novel, Sacrificial Animals. You both have a unique style of horror that is brutal yet poetic and uses slow burn, existential dread, visceral gore, and transforms the mundane into something as terrifying as the supernatural. So I'm really excited to talk to you both and appreciate you being on the show today. So, Briana, Indigent is set in an opiate-ravaged, rapidly gentrifying neighborhood on Atlanta's east side and revolves around Xavier, a young black man whose life takes a dark and surreal turn following a mysterious infection. The infection is not just physical, it warps Xavier's sense of reality, plunging him into the grim, claustrophobic world beneath Leigh Pierce Estates, where he becomes part of a family of squatters driven by cycles of economic desperation and addiction. So instead of relying on typical horror tropes, how did you leverage body horror to reflect the psychological realities of gentrification and addiction?
Yes, something I really wanted to tackle when I was writing, well, first the screenplay and then this book, secondly, was trying to tie together these more visceral horror aspects with some more like conscious or social horror as well. So what I always kept coming back to with the content of Indigent was just this idea of consumption and overconsumption and how all of these things have one similarity, and it's that they just keep wanting to eat more and more and more, and they aren't satiated anyway. I recently watched a documentary that went into like mythology about like the Witigo or the Wendigo, where it's like their curse is that no matter how much they eat, they're still hungry. And the more they eat, the hungrier they get. And I thought that was such like a visceral idea of just like this endless hunger and consumption that fuels things like gentrification, that fuels things like addiction, and that fuels the parasites that show up in Indigent as well, where they just have this endless need to continue consuming not just like physical food, but just like the thoughts and experiences and feelings of whoever their host is as well. So I wanted to tie all of those in together into like this horrific body horror shenanigans story where the eating is like metaphorical and very, very literal at the same time.
Yeah, I'm not the most well versed with body horror, so I don't know if it's a common trope, but I really thought that, and I hope this isn't a spoiler, I can cut it out if it is. Um, I was really creeped out and terrified by the fact that, their bodies housed these parasites that wanted human, flesh, human viscera, but it was cool as long as they cannibalized other people. If you got some outside meat, they would leave yours alone.
It was definitely, I was trying to go for the creep factor with that. So my partner is a zoologist who helped me out a lot with parasite facts and scary parasite behavior. So that weird tit for tat of like, oh, if you do this for them, they'll leave you alone as the host is like a common parasite behavior. So I tried to put that into like the horrific aspects of how the parasite works as well.
Gotcha. Well, what does home mean in a setting where everyone is simultaneously struggling with each other as well as themselves?
Now that is a good question. I struggled with that one, honestly, because I think my honest answer is that I don't know. And I think it depends on the person because all of these characters, like, not only do they not physically have a home if they are squatting, or their home is being physically torn down, so they don't have one anymore, but also just the home that you feel metaphorically with other people and within your own body is also being broken down in this story. So a bunch of these characters are just metaphorically and literally homeless by the end. And I actually kind of wanted to hit this off to Kailee as well, where I think the concept of home being very, very complicated and tough to parse out also pops up in Sacrificial Animals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's some commonality there in our approach to this idea of home as being this place that's really fraught. Although I think your take, Briana, almost looks sort of toward our modernity and toward the future in some sense, whereas mine is kind of almost looking toward the past. Like the home is more of like a mythic place or a place of almost like these cycles of renewal, or like almost like an operatic sense where the home is like symbolic for something else that's occurring there, that maybe harkens back to like older media, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One term that you kind of opened my eyes up to is you said that this book is body horror for the precariat. What does horror unlock for you philosophically when talking about economic precarity?
Yeah, I think something that I've really struggled with and tried to really nail down with this debut is this idea of like what counts as horror and like what constitutes as horror. Because I feel like so much of what we consider to be within the horror genre is just horrific things happening to people who it quote unquote is not supposed to be happening to. And then if it happens to people who it's supposed to happen to, then it's just like another Tuesday. It's not scary. It's not horror. So something that I wanted to really focus on with this novel is taking people who like economic disenfranchisement has made like the usual targets of these kinds of horrific actions So, like, economically disenfranchised people are the ones who walk around with parasites because they can't afford medication. They're the ones living in areas that are getting gentrified. They're the ones who cannot trust these institutions. And all of those are objectively horrific things for people to be dealing with. But many people, I don't think, would say that constitutes horror just because it's not happening to like the unusual suspects. So I wanted to take that idea of what people believe to be horrific and kind of just twist it on its head that way.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off what you were talking about, the sort of class struggle, reviewers describe your book as, quote, an acid bath class struggle. How do you decide what's worth confronting directly versus what's better left implied or lurking in the subtext?
So, dude, I love that quote, by the way. I am so happy that someone described this book like that. Like, oh, you described it way better than I ever could.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you also resonated with it being described that way.
Mhm.
So if it was up to me, I would leave everything in subtext and like nothing would be explicit and nothing would be overt. Obviously, you cannot tell other stories for other people that way. So I
Uh-huh.
tried to have as many things be as subtextual as possible. And obviously, it is like a body horror novel first and foremost. So it's using the body horror as like a meta commentary on these kind of like overconsumption habits that you find in lots of places. So I tried to stick with the subtext for the horror very, very often, and then have some more explicit, like class conscious messaging in the like family drama aspects of it. And hopefully I married the two well enough. Who knows? That is up to readers.
Well, how did your personal encounters with Tennessee's landscape and healthcare struggles shape the psychological terrain of Indigent?
Yes, so very, very TLDR on healthcare stuff. Like my day job is as a healthcare worker, and Indigent is heavily, heavily inspired by my time as like a home health worker, where I was going to all of these different places, like in the Southeast United States, like ping ponging between like the richest neighborhoods we had, where I was like seeing patients in mansions and like the poorest places humanly imaginable, where it's just like a single trailer out in the middle of nowhere, like with no Wi-Fi or anything. And just seeing these like healthcare and economic disparities and just seeing like the abject distrust that a bunch of people within like the working class or the disenfranchised class had for me showing up there, even though I was trying to help, was what I was trying to like nail down with like the themes of medical trauma within this book. So just looking at like, why do these people have medical trauma? Why do these people distrust healthcare workers? Why do they think it's a good idea to not tell their doctor that all of these horrific things are happening to them? And just trying to approach that with much more like realism and empathy so that people can get an idea of what this lived experience is like.
So, Indigent has been compared to Parasite and The Troop, and like I admitted earlier, I'm not really that familiar with body horror, so you might have to school me on that a little bit. What myths or cultural archetypes lurk underneath your characters' actions, and how do they drive class violence in the story?
Well, kind of similar to Parasite, which is the Bong Joon-ho film about just people really going at it with class warfare. My characters have a lot of insecurities connected to what their social class is, and a lot of like pipe dreams and high hopes that are not going to happen connected to wanting to economically advance. So, unlike the characters in Parasite, they don't ever get the chance to like have at it with some rich people. Like, there are no
Hmm.
rich people in this story. It's all just kind of poor people being forced to eat each other because no one else is around. But that is the underlying conflict for the most part.
Well, it was a very entertaining, highly disturbing, very complex. Definitely one of those books you really need to read again for everything, or, maybe multiple times for everything to sink in.
And I intend for like pretty much all of my works, like screenplay, novel, whatever, to be more of a conversation, more of a discussion. So you saying that it is a book that you have to reread probably is like the highest honor I can think. So thank you.
Well, Kailee, Sacrificial Animals is your debut novel, correct?
Yes.
Okay. It's set on a Nebraska farm. The novel follows two brothers, Nick and Joshua Morrow, who are summoned home by their abusive father, Carlisle, who reveals that he's dying of cancer. The family's return stirs old wounds, and Nick quickly becomes entangled with his brother's wife, Amelia, whose complex, ambiguous identity draws on ancient Chinese legends. As tensions and suspicions escalate, the story exposes how love, violence, and supernatural possibility intersect across cultural and personal divides. So, what resonated for you in melding ancient Chinese legend with rural American dysfunction?
I personally was adopted as a baby into a rural Nebraska farming family. So that was really the genesis of the novel, was my family's farm in Nebraska, which is the basis of Stag's Crossing, the 1,000-acre farm upon which the entirety of Sacrificial Animals pretty much takes place. And I knew that I wanted to bring in something surprising, maybe something a little uncanny or strange or unsettling into the midst of these things. And just drawing from my heritage and my background is where I came up with an idea of this Chinese American woman, Amelia, coming into this family and really just turning the tables on them and really upending the entire possibility of what their family is or will be.
Gotcha. And the character of Amelia occupies sort of a both mythic and human space. How did mythology help you excavate rather than flatten her agency as a woman of color?
There's a theme throughout the novel that otherness and its presence on the farm is related to supernatural possibility and qualities. For example, Nick, who is, he never calls himself bisexual, but he develops a relationship with another boy as a young man. His queerness lends itself to this kind of otherness, his sort of feminine side that he's more in touch with than his father and brother. Then there's his mom, who's dead, but her presence still lingers over the farm like a ghost. And with Amelia, I think the mythic quality helped sort of bust her out of maybe some of these Asian stereotypes that you sometimes find characters accidentally falling into, however well-intentioned the author was writing them. She's able to be complex. She's simultaneously being on some level oppressed by the racism on the farm, but she's also spiteful. She's cruel. She has these qualities where she can be quite manipulative and uncomfortably so, in my opinion. So there's not really any one single side of her. She has all these facets that really defy categorization.
Gotcha. Well, farm life often gets romanticized. In your novel, it's a crucible for violence and hunger. So, how do you see landscape as both a character and catalyst for horror?
I think sense of place is a huge thing for me in my novels. I almost always have to start with a setting that I really can immerse myself in, and then the characters act within that setting almost as characters act within the set of a play. Um, for me, I think this quality of Nebraska as its own character really added a unique element to Sacrificial Animals. I think there are definitely horror set on farms and things like that, but I really tried to bring a great deal of authenticity to it, and like a great deal of knowledge about the Midwest. And then in terms of the catalyst for horror, I think there's just something so remarkably desolate and isolating about these rural towns, and something so deeply evocative about them that I really felt it was a prime place for the Gothic to occur.
Yeah. Well, according to reviewers, they say that Sacrificial Animals, quote, disrupts the binaries of monster and victim. How do you spin that ambiguity into dread instead of comfort?
This was something I think we were kind of talking about a while ago, Brianna, if you want to chime in after I'm done kind of with my thoughts on this one. We were talking about how we think queer people and people of color sometimes occupy a really interesting space in horror because in some cases we're victimized or we're victims of these oppressive forces, these frightening things that Brianna, you were just talking about, where scary things happen to, let's say, the underclass of some kind, and you're really trying to bring that out. But I also think there's this double-sided nature to it because in the works of some authors or in some media, especially older media, and I'm going to here cite the works of Lovecraft, the other or explicitly people of color are the monster. So there's a way in which when we exist as people of color, we are already sort of within these collapsed boundaries, I think. We're victims, but depending on the biases or prejudices of the person seeing us, we could also be somebody who would cause fear within a community.
Yeah, definitely. It reminds me of a good number of the articles or the essays that you can read in the It Came from the Closet like anthology of like horror essays from different queer creators, where there's always kind of like this tension within the horror genre of like, oh, how can you enjoy horror when it has like XYZ problematic aspects? Like, how can women see themselves in horror if it's misogynistic? How can Black people see themselves in horror if, like, the Black guy always dies first and all of these different tropes? And I think having, like, that resonance with the idea of, like, being othered and there being, like, a certain amount of ambiguity where you can take it as a source of power if you would like to, has really kind of latched on to a lot of people who enjoy horror from like real life margins of society.
Well, speaking to Kaylee, you are often praised for writing, quote, unsettling fiction. What are the hidden costs, psychological or emotional, of refusing to soothe your reader?
I think we live in a really profoundly unsettling and uncomfortable time. And I think it can be tough to ask someone to spend money or go to the library and engage with the work that is challenging and that will not comfort them at the end and may or may not provide answers and may or may not simply deliver them into an inferno of emotion without really any recourse. So there's this quality where I think my work isn't really a comfort read or an easy read, and I think that's okay. I've learned to live with that, but I know that some people are looking for that, which is totally okay, and it may not be for them. And I've just kind of had to be like, well, that's totally fine, but this may not be for you. But I have found readers who do enjoy that, and that's really great too.
Is there any issue for you, though? Is it cathartic or does it take a toll on you at all?
I don't know if it's cathartic or really anything. I mean, I do like opera singing, so I typically die on stage as well. So I'm sort of used to it at this point, I guess. I think for me, I just strive to tell the truth in everything that I do. And if the truth is bleak and difficult, then what am I going to do? Lie?
Yeah. Well, as an adoptee, how have the realities of, quote, origin stories and fragmented histories subverted or enriched your approach to the horror genre?
As an adoptee, I think my life story begins with loss and it begins with a kind of death in some sense. I have never met my birth family. I'm still looking for them. I don't know anything about them. And as a baby, I was placed in an orphanage, which is kind of ironic because I do think orphanages and orphans appear quite a lot in fiction, generally written by people who were not orphans and were never in an orphanage. So sometimes I have to encounter depictions of these things that are maybe not so well researched. And I think sometimes I have a relation to discussions of family and heritage and race and ethnic identity that are going to be vastly different than even other people of color who are just not adopted. So there's often a distance for me when it comes to horror. Like, my work is queer horror, it is Asian American horror, however you want to categorize it, of course. But again, I'm an Asian person who was raised on a farm in Nebraska by a white Jewish father and a white Protestant mother. That's a very different story than somebody who maybe has a different upbringing. So for me, there's always going to be this sense of alienation and distance, I think, that makes its way into my characters, and I think impacts the psychological horror of the work.
Well, piggybacking off your previous statement about being an opera singer and dying on stage, music and opera are central passions in your life. Do you ever experience writing prose as a kind of composition? And if so, how do rhythm and silence factor into your creative decisions?
I do think that my work has a very sonic quality to it. I frequently break or frankly ignore general grammatical rules to emphasize the rhythm or the pulse of a line in the way that I see most fitting. I actually started in poetry, so I think some of that is from that too. But I do think that for me, it's about how the work sounds and how it feels, not so much in like a textual sense, but almost as like like a musical sense, or with this musical quality, not so much with pitch, but with almost like movement or motion through time alongside the words. And so I do think opera does factor into how I write in some way because of that training.
Okay. Well, as we spoke about earlier, this next part of the interview is kind of a free for all. So you guys just jump in. You've both been recognized for elevating queer and BIPOC voices. Do you believe horror is uniquely suited for exploring identity, or do you see it as a vehicle for something more universal?
This question, I think, can go in a lot of different ways. I will definitely pass it off to Kailee when I am done speaking on it. But at least in my opinion, I think horror is very much just like a lens of seeing a certain situation. It's a lens through which you see the world. So horror's bread and butter is like having different perspectives that you haven't really considered before. And like, if those different perspectives think something is horrific that you have not considered horrific, they can kind of bring you in and encourage that empathy and have that catharsis of people finally understanding what makes this thing scary. And I think horror is very unique in giving people who have those kind of like unseen anxieties that voice, and finding other people who like resonate with it as well. The fact that like BIPOC or queer writers can like work and play in that horror playground in particular, I think is more secondary. I think they can do that in any genre, really. I just think horror is really, really conducive towards it.
I would generally agree with Briana. I do think horror has something really special and really primal about it as a genre or lens, or however you want to phrase it, that is very potent for queer and BIPOC authors. One thing I wanted to maybe a little bit of a spicy take think about was when we talk about identity and universality, I think it often comes up in the context of queer and BIPOC people, but the reality is if someone were like a hypothetical heterosexual white man and they were to write a novel, their work would also have identity as well within it, even if they didn't intend it to. So just because you are maybe not of a minority group in some way doesn't mean your work isn't interfacing with identity. It may just not be doing it as in such an obvious sense. And I often think that our default universality is toward the dominant group. So this question of is it a vehicle for something more universal? I think maybe it might be on the readers to expand themselves into thinking of these stories from other groups as being more universal than perhaps they are at first glance.
Gotcha. Well, in a publishing ecosystem hungry for, quote, own voices, what complexities or pressures do you wish editors, reviewers, or readers understood better?
So I think I can talk a little bit about, and I'm going to refer to a previous conversation we had on this, Briana, as well, like some of our, I guess, things that we like about own voices and things that we maybe are like more hesitant or have kind of more ambiguous feelings about, if I'm remembering your conversation correctly. I think we basically were chatting and thinking about own voices, and I think we sort of came on the side of, again, paraphrasing, that it's generally a well-meaning label that, you know, it's there to identify works that are drawn from the author's lived experience and to, I think, help avoid creating or promoting works where maybe the person is not, you know, well-intentioned, or maybe they aren't well-researched, or they don't have that experience, so they end up accidentally perpetuating stereotypes, for example. But I think one of the things of the complexities and pressures, for me at least personally, is that I think own voices can sometimes be almost this constricting or collapsing label at times. Like, I fear that if we promote own voices, then there often comes this expectation that people of color only write about our own identities, right? Or that we only write about queer people, or that we're not allowed to really do anything else, or that's all that we can offer. And I kind of sometimes fear that it doesn't allow us to play in such a big sandbox while still being well-intentioned. It has this sort of constricting feeling, if that makes sense. And especially for someone like me whose Asian, Jewish, queer identity is so fraught with so many like asterisks due to being adopted and from like a more unique background, I'm often like, am I not Asian enough for own voices? Like, if I say I'm writing an Asian character, are people going to be like, well, you weren't raised in an Asian household, or you're not Asian culturally? Is that enough for them? Right. So that's kind of my general thoughts at first. But Briana, I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, it is a really kind of complicated category. And I always just try to remind people that in terms of like own voice storytelling, it's very much like a self-label at this point. So own voices as a category existed for like a year, maybe in 2021. And then all of those issues that Kailee mentioned started popping up, and authors started feeling more kind of pigeonholed than they really should have been, and more, what is the word? Just like limited in what they're able to like talk about, both like in their works and on social media and all that stuff. So while it is, I think, well-meaning as a term, I also think it's really, really dependent on like self-identifying as that. So I think if someone says their work is like an own voices work, then it is. And then if they don't say it is, then you probably shouldn't label it as that if they haven't overtly said so. Just because of all of those like complexities about like what quote unquote good representation looks like, that can have people arguing forever into the sunsets if we let them.
So, kind of maybe in the same sandbox as that previous question, is there anything you actively do to kind of safeguard the integrity of marginalized experience without, you know, reducing it to a symbol or a trend?
I think I just want to reflect what Kailee said a little bit earlier when she was talking about her experience, where I really just want to tell the truth with my writing. So I want to depict people who are real in real situations, who are reacting to the situation they're in realistically. And sometimes that is very flattering, and sometimes it's not very flattering. And I don't care as much about some like hypothetical or mythical idea of good representation as much as I care about providing that truth to an experience.
Well, so Kailee, or I'm sorry, did you want to chime in on that?
I was just going to say that I agree. And I also feel like, as queer and BIPOC authors, and speaking for me specifically, something that I've had to accept over many, many years of thinking, reflection, and therapy is that I wasn't put on this planet to make people accept Asian people or Jewish people or queer people. I'm just here to be myself. And my work isn't there as like a plea for, you know, don't be racist, or like a plea for my humanity. It's just my art, you know?
Gotcha. I was looking up, so we've got Kailee. You have says a classics in Columbia University specializing in ancient Greek. So good God, when it comes to like the philology standpoint, doesn't that give you quite a breadth of understanding of the English language that, the average person doesn't have?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, I'm fluent in ancient Greek and Latin, which allows me to read ancient Greek and Latin, and I guess allows me to know the roots of some stuff. But I think people can grasp the English language quite well without that training. I think mostly what it gives me is a really deep and wonderful knowledge of like Homer and Sappho and Euripides and these other Greek and Latin writers that I love. And also the reassurance that if I were to ever fall into a time machine and end up in ancient Rome, I probably wouldn't be killed immediately, but then I'd probably get a bacteria and die because I'm really, prone to sinus infection. And I don't have antibiotics back then, so I would probably be dead quite soon. But I'd be able to get around for a couple of weeks before I expired.
Gotcha. Only reason I ask is I forget who I was watching get interviewed. So, it was a PhD, classical Greek, and he was talking about particular passages in the Bible that
that's in Koine, which you can read if you can read ancient Greek or whatever.
Yeah. So with that on your side, Kailee, and then on Briana's side, as I had brought up before, cognitive science, speech language pathology. How have both of your backgrounds outside literature influenced the psychological realism or structure of your fiction?
I think for me, the opera and ancient Greek really came in crafting this almost Greek tragedy atmosphere for the novel. I really drew on Aeschylus's The Oresteia. I really drew on the opera plots that involve a lot of personal desires, failings, and baggage coming together and just imploding spectacularly. And I think this richness of text that you find in opera, this indulgence that you find in the Greek corpus and the Latin corpus, and in the poetry especially, is really not as modern. Like, we don't really do that in modern day English writing so much anymore. And I really wanted to throw back to some of that. So that also influenced my style.
Yeah, and I just want to say before I get into my thing that I love like the old timey, like Greco-Roman vibes to Kailee's writing. They just feel so epic all the time.
Uh-huh.
So I really enjoy it. But for mine, I am mainly just a language nerd, I think. So I like majored in cognitive science with a specialization in like psycholinguistics, went on to do like communication science disorder stuff. So I feel like most of my writing is just really, really rooted in how people use language and how people use their voices and relate to other people's voices. So like dialects and code switching when they're talking with different people and the relationship they have to like bilingualism or multilingualism, and just identifying different characters by the words they use to talk about things was stuff I was really interested in exploring more with prose. So I tried to do that a lot more with like the shifting formats in my book where it focuses on the linguistics of it a bit more. So who knows if people would enjoy that, but I certainly do.
Yeah, the cognitive science is very interesting to me. I've always wondered, I've tried to be bilingual. I was attempting to learn Spanish for my job, and I actually got to the point where I could, I was a medic, so I could kind of get the information I needed, to treat somebody in the pre-hospital scenario. But then I got off the ambulance and completely lost it. But I've always wondered what it's like to be fluent in another language and know what you want to communicate, but I don't even know how to put it into words, which is kind of meta considering what I'm trying to explain. But, you know how and correct me if I'm wrong, there's certain things that you don't communicate the same way in different languages. Is that correct?
There's this idea in like linguistic philosophy, essentially, that like who you are as a person changes depending on what language you're speaking. So I really, really feel where you're coming from there. Like, I wish I was still fluent in multiple languages. Like, kind of like you, like, I could speak Japanese at one point, and I was very, very, like, functionally fluent in it. Then I moved away, so I don't think I count as fluent in Japanese anymore. So I get, like, this sense of loss with once being very good at another language and just not being very good anymore.
So, what philosophies in both of your work undergird it when it comes to desire? Like, how do power, need, and hunger manifest beyond the literal?
Well, in my work, something that I was trying to focus on, like metaphorically in terms of hunger, because obviously it is a cannibalism book. Literal physical hunger is a big part of it, but just
Uh,
also having it like extend into the metaphor of people being hungry for more like human connection and more emotional connection in like this urban sprawl environment where even though people are squished into shoebox apartments right next to each other, like no one really knows each other and people feel incredibly isolated. So taking that like physical hunger and extending it into like that emotional hunger of just trying to get all of the love you can get and all of the connection you can get was an important aspect of mine.
I think for me, I kind of went a little bit more like psychoanalytic in terms of, I guess, any quote unquote underlying philosophy. I tend to be really involved in the characters' psyches and psychologies. There's a lot of things about dreams and dream interpretation in the novel. There's also, of course, the underlying childhood trauma that continues to like remanifest over and over for Nick. So I think this, like on my side, it was more of like a philosophy about trauma, its effect on the body, and its effect on the and the whole like subconscious coming together to create some kind of conscious happening that was quote unquote the plot.
and you've both, I think it was in a interview, you've both mentioned resisting the idea of the quote elevated genre. Um, can you kind of explain the elevated genre concept and what is your approach to craft when it comes to balancing literary ambition with horror's immediacy?
So my understanding is that elevated X or whatever we want to call it is kind of another way of saying like literary X. So you might see like literary horror, elevated horror as a term. I wouldn't say I totally resist or reject it. I mean, if people want to label my work as that, that's fine. I think I'm more just, I try to not think about genre too much at all when I'm writing because I like to let myself be free and write whatever I want. In terms of the literary ambition with the immediacy of horror, for me, it was more about the, I guess, sentence by sentence level beauty and trying to create something really richly wrought and formed. And that ended up being, for some reviewers, labeled as literary horror. And then in terms of the horror itself, again, to return to a theme that keeps popping up, I just wanted to write something real and visceral, and that ended up being kind of violent. So that's what happened for me.
Yeah, and Indigent is also essentially marketed as literary horror for much of the same reason as Kaylee's. Like, I was really interested, as I said before, with like my linguistics background and like line level language stuff. I find that really fascinating. So if people read that as being like literary horror, I'm not going to like bite their head off or anything. But I think genre expectations are like a blessing and a curse because it gives people an idea of what they're in for. But I think it can also be really restrictive. So, like Kaylee, I kind of just like writing what I write. And I like writing some pretty, like, macabre stuff a lot of the time. So, it counts as horror just because it's like weird and spooky and gory. And I guess it counts as literary because it sounds pretty. And I'm cool with being considered both. But I really like emphasizing that, like, the idea that something can't be literary and genre at the same time, I think is damaging. So I try to just let people think what they think without labeling my work either way myself.
Well, so as you've stated, you just kind of write what you write. You're not really concerned with a genre per se, but I'm curious to know if there's anything rebellious that you've done, like artistically, out of frustration with genre or publishing or audience expectations.
Yeah, that is a good question. I might ask Kailee to answer first because I'm not sure.
I don't think of myself as like a super rebellious person. I try not to let others dictate or push me to do something, even if it's in defiance of what they're asking me to do. So I think my work truly comes from within. And in some sense, like, how am I going to rebel against myself? But I will say I have like departed from my initial novel. So my second novel is not gothic. It's more of a psychological drama. And then my third novel, which is very in progress, is a Western. So we'll see how that one turns out. I got a very late ADHD diagnosis at the age of 29, and it's explaining a lot about me. So there we are. I kind of just need to be all over the place sometimes.
Gotcha.
What about you, Briana?
Yeah, I feel like the most rebellious thing I did in the course of this novel was literally making it a novel. So this started out as a screenplay, and I don't know if anyone's told you this, but trying to pitch a cannibal movie to have people give you millions of dollars to make it is hard to do.
Yeah.
So I eventually just decided that, like, I wanted control over this. I think it's a cool enough story that I want people to actually experience it. So I am going to make this a book instead. And it made me realize that, yeah, I actually do like writing prose still. So I do enjoy this. It's not just me doing it out of spite, but I would be lying if I didn't say it started as me doing it out of spite. I love writing screenplays, but it's very, very rare to see the end result of a screenplay for people to like actually consume as like people who enjoy art. So I've enjoyed actually getting my work out to people in book form.
But aren't there, like I interviewed a professor, so long ago, I can't remember her name. She submitted screenplays to competitions. Do you do that at all?
Oh yeah, competitions are kind of a mixed bag. They can be very helpful or they can be very unhelpful. It's kind of just what you make of it. So the screenplay for Indigent has done very, very well competitions wise. But when it comes to like getting more into the pre-production stage, it can be tougher. So I think one of the other like more quote unquote rebellious things I've done is like opt to go with small press instead of doing like a larger, more traditional publisher. And like I did that because I wanted to own the rights to audio and visual adaptations because I still want to make it a movie. So part of that was me kind of bucking expectations as well. But it's really just, like I said, me doing my own thing still.
Well, one thing I wanted to know, in editing your manuscripts, were there any scenes or elements you cut that still haunt you or feel essential to understanding your narrative's heart?
Honestly, for me, no. I actually had to revise with my agent because my novel started at 50,000 and ended at 75,000 words. So I actually had to add stuff. So everything that's in there is my guts and intestines presented for you. So have fun.
That needs to be like a blurb on the book.
Yeah, I feel like my first draft was like 120K words. It was like 120K and I cut it down to like 85. Yeah, I was really inspired by like Let the Right One In and Salem's Lot. And if you haven't read either of those books, they have like 2 million points of view. So I was like, I'm going to have so many points of view in this book. And pretty much everything that got cut was like those like superfluous points of views. So I know what's going on with like every single neighbor who lives in this apartment. You don't have to know that as a reader, but I know. And it all got cut for the final version.
You brought up a flashback. I went and saw the play of Let the Right One In at the Alley Theater here in Houston, and it was a Scottish traveling troupe. I guess that's what you would refer to it as, that was there. And man, was that a great play.
I had no idea they turned that into a play. So that is interesting.
Yeah, you should definitely check it out if it ever comes to town. So as we kind of come towards the end, I was curious to know about both of you. We'll start with Briana. What is the life of Briana Cox like outside of writing?
Now, that is an excellent question. I feel like a lot of my life is writing right now with this debut coming out, and I'm also still working as a screenwriter. So one of my scripts is in production right now. So I'm still in constant contact with them, answering all the minutia questions, like what color is like the car in the scene supposed to be? So all of that kind of stuff. So writing is very much what I am into right now. But outside of writing, I am just trying to do a lot of like self-care stuff in this very, very hectic time we're living in. Like buying lots of vinyl records, buying lots of books to catch up on, even though I have like 300 books I still need to read. So just all the nerd stuff.
And what is the life of Kailee Pedersen like outside of writing?
I literally can only be found at basically like the practice room. So I'm in 3 operas in the spring. And then I'm also at my day job as a software engineer. I'll hopefully be traveling again to Austria this next year to study at the Mozarteum, which is usually where I study in the summer at the conservatory. And then outside of writing, day job, opera, seeing my friends, and then I'm a big gamer. That's pretty much all I do. Kind of a homebody.
Nice. Which operas are you doing?
I will be doing Liu and Turandot, Zerlina and Don Giovanni, and Susanna in The Marriage of Figaro.
Nice. Very nice. All right. All sounds good. Well, Briana, Kailee, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks so much for having us on. It was great for us too.
Yes, thank you.
Well, so as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your readers know about? And whoever wants to jump in.
I'll go. Hi, y'all. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Kailee Pedersen. If you're interested in my work, you can read the paperback of Sacrificial Animals, which is out now. And my next novel, The Minimalist, comes out in August of 2026. You can also visit my author website at KaileePedersen.com.
Briana.
Yeah, and my stuff, I'll just go ahead and plug Indigent. So Indigent is coming out March 20th, 2026 through Graveside Press. You can pre-order the ebooks now, but I have it on very good authority that the physical copies are badass. So if you want to wait for those, you might want to. And yeah, I have a bunch of works in progress as well. So you can follow me at BrianaNCoxWriter.com as well to just stay updated on that.
All right. Sounds good. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Briana, Kailee, thank you again for joining me. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.